Okay, so Unit 9.3, Part 2. We left off with the pre-war critics, and now we're going to get to, we've had the war, and now you're going to get some post-war people, philosophers and authors, who expand on the earlier pessimism of those four thinkers we talked about pre-World War I. So the first we're going to talk about is Paul Valéry. 1871 to 1945. He's a French poet who spoke of the cruelly injured mind besieged by doubts and suffering from anxieties due to economic, political, and social disruptions of the 1920s. So all of these crises that we're going to examine in Unit 10, he's going to say are going to create all of these anxieties, and it's besieging our mind from, and we're having anxieties due to all of this turmoil. And so at this time period, we're also going to see what is known as logical empiricism, or sometimes called logical positivism, taking root in English-speaking universities. It's going to be developed by Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1889 to 1951, and it is comes into being as part of the Vienna Circle, which is an English-speaking university in the 1920s and 1930s. And what it's going to promote is that philosophy is only the logical clarification of thoughts. And so, I mean, that's really abstract in its own. So what does that mean? So it's going to say the abstract concepts regarding God, like God being an abstract concept. You can't say he's like 7 foot and this is what he looks like. It's abstract. So concepts like God, freedom, morality, etc. are senseless, since they can neither be tested by scientific experiments nor demonstrated by the logic of mathematics. And so these abstract things are senseless. They're pointless to even talk about because we can't quantify them. They can't be tested. They can't be demonstrated. And they're going to say that only your own personal experience is worth analyzing. And so you can start to see that this would create some of that anxiety too, hence the age of anxiety. Like there's no hope. It's just my own experiences. There's nothing is like real, those things that we've been hinging on. And so this logical empiricism, as I was just saying, is really like, it doesn't give you this glimmer of hope like the church had given people, hope to settle their things in, or rationalism and experimentation had. There's no hope for the anxious. Like, don't even talk about these abstract things. There's not this great answer. We should just, not even think about it. And so then we're also going to see the rise of anti-utopian. Now, we've seen utopian before, like perfect world. Now we're going to see anti-utopian, or like now everything is bad. So people writing about how everything is bad and reflecting a pessimistic, uncertain future. We're going to see Oswald Spengler, the first we're going to talk about here, 1880 to 1936, gives us a book called The Decline of the West. And so when we're talking about West, we're talking about Europe or Western civilization. And even like America is going to become like that offshoot of Europe. So The Decline of the West, he's going to say that every culture experiences a life cycle. So it's born, and then it grows, and then it's going to decline. And he's going to say that Western civilization, European civilization, is in its old age, and that death or decline was approaching in the form of conquest by Asians, or he's going to say like the yellow race. He's going to say that Europe's time is over, it's dying, and now is the rise of the Asian race, the next rising group. And I mean, I don't know, right? Look what's happening now. I mean, like, as Europe's right now, United States, we're kind of having a decline, and I mean, look at China right now. So is there this life cycle where this one group is in its prime and its youth, and others are declining? And so that's what Oswald Spengler is going to promote in his book, The Decline of the West. So a pretty, pessimistic viewpoint, especially if you're living in the Western world. And so next we have an author, or probably more that you've seen, a poet, T.S. Eliot, 1888 to 1965, and he's going to give us a poem called The Wasteland in 1922. Probably a poet you've read before by senior year, or at least heard of. And so he's going to depict in this poem, The Wasteland, a world of growing desolation, and some consider it the most famous long poem of the 20th century after World War I. And so the poem really is going to encapsulate this world after a World War I. If you really think about even the topographical look of Europe is this wasteland, and then the human being as its own being in this anxious age of not, is anything real, is anything right or wrong. So T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland. And so next we have Franz Kafka, and he's going to be one of the few authors we'll see that his name is used to describe a situation, which is known as Kafkaesque, which we're going to get to in just a little bit more detail. But 1883 to 1924, he is going to portray helpless individuals destroyed by inexplicably hostile and surreal forces. Some of his works are The Trial in 1925, The Castle in 1926, and The Metamorphosis in 1915. And so he's going to explore this idea of the individual's alienation from his surroundings, society, and from himself. And like I said, his name becomes this adjective that has entered the language to express the absurd, the surreal, the terrifying world that he'll create. And like The Metamorphosis is a story about this guy who wakes up and he's a cockroach. So it's essentially this a crazy nightmarish experience, this terrifying world that you wake up in and you can't get out of, and it's just so surreal and crazy. And so his works are about things like this and kind of that anxiety of the way the world is after World War I. And so if something is Kafkaesque, it's basically a crazy, like I said, like his work Metamorphosis, nightmare situation that most people can relate to in some way. You're that sounds really crazy, but you're also yeah, I feel like I've been in positions where I just I can't have control. People don't feel in control in this time period. Something that is horribly complicated for no reason, that you just can't figure out, and there's just floating omnipotent type of evil that you can't quite grasp, but you can feel there behind the scenes, but you just can't figure it out. And so people or characters that find themselves in a Kafkaesque setting are often, they know the evil's there, they're stuck in this absurd thing, but they can't find a clear course of action to escape the situation. So I don't know, the example, the DMV, when you go in and there's no sense, first you go to this line and they tell you to go over there and nothing, make here, go there, and then go here. A bureaucracy is kind of Kafkaesque red tape. There's no way out. You can't really find, and it's constantly changing, and you're kind of at the whim of others telling you, is that person behind the counter really evil and this is all a game or a maze? And I'm sure you all remember, you've had some experiences by now with this Kafkaesque, oh, we're all in this line but nobody's getting anywhere, and then I was in the wrong line. So you can't find a clear course to escape. And so to explain a little bit more, there's this biography by Frederick R. Carl on Kafka, and he's going to say, what's Kafkaesque? And in an interview in his Manhattan apartment, he said it is when you enter a surreal world in which all your control patterns, all of your plans, the whole way in which you've configured your own behavior begins to fall to pieces. When you find yourself against a force that does not lend itself to the way you perceive the world. You don't give up, you don't lie down and die. What you do is struggle against this with all of your equipment, with whatever you have. But of course you don't stand a chance. That's Kafkaesque. And so I think that really sums up what Kafka is trying to put through in his works. It's this struggle that you just can't get past. Something evil is controlling it and you're in this surreal situation. And so that very much, are you anxious yet? That's an anxiety, you can't do anything about it, but you're stuck in it. And next on your list is All Quiet on the Western Front, but we've really already talked about that. It's an anti-war novel. It's a powerful novel telling the horrors of trench warfare, so the anxiety of this new technology of warfare, and it's a retelling of the account of trench warfare during World War I. And so then number 5 here, our next step here, is out of all of this, pessimism is going to emerge something called existentialism, and it will take root in continental countries after World War II, so not so much in Great Britain, but on the continent, and it comes out of all of these crises, this age of crisis we're going to see in Unit 10, and especially in the wake of the horrors of World War II and the advent of the atomic age or the atomic bomb. Just think about poof, everyone's dead. And so, like I said, this unit transcends all of this age of anxiety between the world wars and during both of them and after World War II. But this pessimism that comes out of the advent of the atomic age and hopelessness is going to be expressed by existentialists. Existentialists see life as absurd. There's no meaning to it. There's no inherent meaning. And they viewed a world where the individual then, since there's no meaning, had to find their own meaning. Like, you have to find your own meaning in every day. Like, things happen for a reason. I think you've heard that. That's like existentialist. Like, I got a flat tire on the way to work this day because something really horrific was going to happen to me if I got there at this certain time. So you have to make your own meaning for life, and like thinking that each thing happens for a reason or is leading you towards something. Most existentialists, as we're going to see, were atheists, but not all of them. But it's because they don't see a meaning. So if there's no meaning, there's no God. And so now we're going to look at two of the big names, and then we'll get into some of those Christian existentialists, because there are some that will try to like reconcile and be Christian and existentialist. And so our first existentialist is Jean-Paul Sartre, 1905 to 1980, and he's going to write that life had no meaning, and that humans just simply exist. We just show up, and we're constantly seeking to define ourselves. He's going to say that honesty is what leads you to despair and meaninglessness. And so, there's no God, etc. And like being honest with yourself and telling yourself that those things aren't real is the honesty, but it's going to lead you to despair, because then you're like, nothing exists. And that this despair from no belief in God, reason, or progress, that then man is condemned to be free. So it's almost like a prison sentence to be free, to understand that there's no God, no reason or progress. And he is going to promote that then what's left to do but to kill himself. That we must act, and that action, the most honest then action would be to kill yourself, because life is meaningless. And so, talk about age of anxiety. How anxious is that? Like, just don't give up. That's it. There's no meaning. But he's going to say, if you don't do that, only through our actions can we overcome the absurdity. So, the only thing to do if you don't kill yourself is try to make actions in your life. But he would say the purest action would then be to kill oneself. So I don't know about you, but that kind of sums up anxiety for me, the age of anxiety. So then our next existentialist is Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960, and he is also going to say, that there is no meaning really to life, so that individuals had to find a meaning to life by taking action against these things with which they disagree. And so he's going to say that the meaning of life, since it's meaningless, can be found by kind of becoming an activist, by finding meaning, by making meaning, by going against things that you disagree with. One's actions are derived from personal choices that are independent from religion or political ideology, and so you set your course. So if animal abuse is something you're really against, then you go out and spend your whole life committed to the action of stopping that. And that's a way to make a meaning of your life. Some other notable names, Martin Heidegger and Karl Jaspers, are also prominent existentialists who have work out there. And so now we get to the Christian existentialists, who are still going to share the loneliness and despair of our atheistic existentialists, but they are going to try to then make that finding a meaning in life, finding that meaning in God. And they are going to stress human beings' sinful nature and the need for faith and the mystery of God's forgiveness. However, our Christian existentialists are going to break with Christian modernists of the late 19th century, that we had talked about, had made science and the Bible reconcile. The Christian existentialists are going to embrace the supernaturalist of Christianity. They want it to be explainable, you just have to give in to the mystery of God. And so our first individual here is Soren Kierkegaard of 1813 to 1855. He is a Danish philosopher, and he is going to kind of base his work on the rediscovery of 19th century works that will lead to the revival of fundamental Christian belief after World War I. And so he is going to kind of be a revivalist of Christian belief, and he believed that Christian faith could anchor the individual caught in troubling modern times, and so that this is something that you could find meaning with by anchoring yourself here. And he's going to be one of those people that really propounds that leap of faith. or dive into the dark. Like, you don't have to know all the answers. Just leap in full-heartedly into Christian faith, and it will anchor you. It will provide an anchor or a weight to keep you tied during these troubling or anxious modern times. And here again we get T.S. Eliot, which we've already talked about, and he created his work within a perceived traditional Christian framework and advocated literacy, allegiance to tradition. But we've already talked about him. We won't spend a lot of time there, and move straight into George Orwell, which is a name that you should be familiar with. And so George Orwell is a figure that if you're not familiar with or haven't read, you probably will. He's famous for his dystopian novels, so like, non-utopian society, and The Animal Farm, one of my faves of his, as an allegorical novella of the Russian Revolution or of a totalitarian state. It depicts the events leading up to the Stalin era in the Soviet Union. You remember, like, each animal represented a different figure from this time period, and all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so that, like, elite ruling of the few and totalitarianism definitely seen there. Next is a book kind of futuristically written called 1984. It was written in 1949, and it's titled Big Brother. So Big Brother would represent the dictator and his totalitarian state use a new kind of language, which is called newspeak, and sophisticated technology and psychological terror to strip a weak individual of his last shred of human dignity. And so it's really just showing that you're part of a group that is totally controlled, and that Big Brother is always watching you. And just think, like, just with the technology he knew about this time, like, think of the technology today, like Big Brother, and how that's been expanded on. So it's a pretty, popular book, a dystopian novel to read. So that's George Orwell. I don't have a slide for all of these. Ayn Rand, I really wish we'd had some time to read some of her work. We Are the Living is my favorite. And it's really going to focus on the struggle between the individual and state, especially with these totalitarian governments that are coming about. Anthem, The Fountainhead. William Golding, Lord of the Flies, you should have read sophomore year or freshman year. Written at this time period, deals with the dark side of humanity and how cruelty and murder result among a group of marooned youths. One of my faves as well. And it's kind of an allegory regarding totalitarianism. Like, how quickly do people in a situation, even like with no rules, develop this totalitarian regime? And then Theater of the Absurd also reflected pessimism after World War II. Samuel Beckett, Irish playwright, gives us Waiting for Godot. And throughout the play, two characters wait for Godot, which might perhaps symbolize God, but he never comes. And the dialogue is disjointed and convoluted. So back to this, like, anxiety, like, what is there a meaning? Is anything real? Is there right or wrong? All of that. And that will move us then back into a category we can't skip, science. So science, if you'll remember, by the late 19th century had become a major pillar supporting Western society's optimistic and rationalistic view of the world. Enlightened rationalism, Newtonian physics, natural laws. We started to see everything was predictable. That's kind of where we left off with science. And then we talked about some of this stuff earlier, so these names are going to sound familiar, so I'll go kind of quick. But you just need to see now the difference because of the pessimism and how some of this anxiety even comes out of this transition into new science. So our first individual here is going to be Max Planck with new physics, which we've talked about before. So this new physics is going to be much popularized after World War I and challenge these long-held ideas of Newtonian physics and leads to uncertainty even in the sciences. So Max Planck, 1858 to 1947, is going to develop the basis for quantum physics in 1900. If you'll remember, he stated that postulated matter and energy might be different forms of the same thing, and this really shakes the foundation of 19th century physics that had viewed atoms as the stable basic building blocks of nature with a different kind of unbreakable atom for each element. And so this really just, people are like, oh, but what we thought was true is not true anymore. And so really shakes and provides some anxiety there as well. Next, we have Albert Einstein again. Remember, in 1905, he gave us the theory of relativity of time and space, and it will challenge traditional ideas of Newtonian physics. This is where we get that whole speed of light thing. And remember, we talked about the twins, and like one in a spaceship and one here on Earth, and traveled 10 years out by the speed of light and 10 years back by the speed of light. And so the twin that was in space is still 20, and the twin that's still on Earth is 40. And as you can imagine, this freaks people out. because it united apparently infinite universe with incredibly small, fast-moving subatomic world. Matter and energy are going to be seen as interchangeable, and that even a particle of matter contains enormous levels of potential. So all of this just starts to freak people. There just becomes this uncertainty, this anxiety with these new proponents of that break the Newtonian physics that had existed for so long. Then we have Ernest Rutherford, 1871 to 1937. And remember, in 1919, he had demonstrated that the atom could be split, which of course we know will lead to the atomic bomb. So talk about freaking people out. And then in 1927, we get Werner Heisenberg. I don't know if any of you watched the show Breaking Bad, but the science teacher or whatever that decides that he needs to, make meth or whatever to raise money for his cancer treatments names himself Heisenberg. So, after this guy. And so he's going to give us the principle of uncertainty, as it is impossible to know the position and speed of an individual. It says election here, it should say electron. And so it is therefore impossible to predict its behavior. And so he's just saying, right there, it's no longer predictable. The dynamics of an experiment is going to alter the state of the subject. So not only is it not predictable, it changes. He's going to say that it changes just in the experiment by you looking at it. Then, so what if I'm looking at this? It's going to change differently than if you were looking at it. And so I have this from howitworks.com is going to show the problem that's revealed by Heisenberg's work here, and that science is all uncertainty now. And so here's an explanation from people who, like I said, I'm not by any day going to be your science, your physics and all of this teacher, quantum physics especially. So imagine that you're blind, and over time you've developed a technique for determining how far away an object is by throwing a medicine ball at it. If you throw your medicine ball at a nearby stool, the ball will return quickly, and you'll know that it's close. If you throw the ball at something across the street from you, it'll take longer to return, and you'll know that the object is far away. The problem, however, is that when you throw a ball, especially a heavy one like a medicine ball, at something like a stool, the ball will knock the stool across the room and may even have enough momentum to bounce back. You can say where the stool was, but not where it is now. What's more, you could calculate the velocity of the stool after you hit it with the ball, but you have no idea what its velocity was before you hit it. So this is the problem revealed by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. To know the velocity of a quark, we must measure it, and to measure it, we are forced to affect it. The same goes for observing an object's position. Uncertainty about an object's position and velocity makes it difficult for a physicist to determine much about the object. And so this pretty much explains the whole just science is uncertainty now. And that is Heisenberg's work. And so the impact of Heisenberg and Einstein and Rutherford and our other scientists on the common mind is going to be that the new universe is now going to seem very strange and troubling. Everything that I held about it is, it's up in the air now and everything's uncertain. The universe will now be relative, dependent on the observer's frame of reference. The universe was uncertain and undetermined without stable building blocks now, and physics no longer provided easy, optimistic answers, or any answers for that matter. So a little more anxious now, continuing on in the age of anxiety. And so if all of this is uncertain, then where are art and entertainment and music going to go? Because if all of these don't have rules anymore and uncertain, that's going to change these things as well. So we're going to start with, in art, our art category here, architecture is a form of art. So we're going to see the late 19th century, the United States. Louis Sullivan is going to pioneer skyscrapers with form that follows function. And so we're going to see form follows function be the theme of architecture at this time period, meaning whatever makes it the most functional, not beautiful. So we're turning away from that ornate or ornamentation to just what makes the building the most functional. So skyscrapers' function would be to hold as many people as possible. Practicality. And so in 1905, we're going to see that architectural leadership is going to shift to German-speaking countries until Hitler in the 1930s, and we're going to talk about what this German movement is called. And so this movement is going to be called the Bauhaus movement. It translates to build house, because Haus is house, so build house movement by Walter Gropius in 1833 to 1969. And he is going to break sharply with the past in his design of what's pictured here, the Fagus And then on your notes as well to the right there, shoe factory at Alfeld, Germany in 1911. And it's going to be a clean, light, elegant building of glass and iron. And it is going to follow that theme of form follows function principle. It represented a jump into the middle of the 20th century. Later, however, like I said, in the 1930s, the movement will be subdued by the Nazis as modernism came to be viewed as degenerate. But we'll take a look at some more examples here of the Bauhaus movement, of Bauhaus architecture. If I can get my slide to go. Okay, there it goes. So some more looks at the Bauhaus. You can see even the Bauhaus on the side of the building here. Architecture, so very much functional, not really aesthetically pleasing, although I would think some people, as you're going to see some of these other things come up, find this kind of architecture beautiful and don't see it just as form following function, with some of the cuts and lines that you'll see. But then of course here's a skyscraper. Go another example. Like some people would say it's like very modern and very beautiful. I don't, and some, like, I mean, I've seen houses on the HGN network that's the thing. Bauhaus in Barcelona. Another, I mean, I think that's cool. I mean, I don't find it particularly unaesthetic. Kind of, I don't know, wouldn't want it in Missouri with all the glass and hence the like crazy storms we've been having, but I don't know what would be a good place for. Here's some Bauhaus furniture. Very form follows function. Very clean. I don't know. Kind of think that's cool too. Some more Bauhaus furniture. Seen some tables like that in conference centers. That looks pretty comfy. So Bauhaus. And here's a guy that you should recognize that we've mentioned before, Pablo Picasso. And he's going to be our most important artist of the 20th century. And if you remember, he developed Cubism along with Georges Braque. And Cubanism, remember, being that concentrating on a complex geometry of zigzagging lines and sharply angled overlapping planes. We looked at a lot of Cubism earlier. We're going to look at some more here. But it often tried to portray all perspectives simultaneously. So here is Guernica, 1937, and it's considered to be his masterpiece. I don't think we looked at this one, or at least not in full detail, when we talked about Picasso before. But this is a huge mural, as you can see. That's why I like this picture with the guy standing there, just so you can see how big it is. Sometimes when you see it in a book, you can't quite grasp the size. But it's a huge mural portraying the bombing of a Spanish city by the German Luftwaffe that we talked about during the Spanish Civil War in 1936. So pretty much there's a civil war going on in Spain in 1937, and Hitler's going to step in on the side, on one side of the Spanish Civil War, and he's going to use his new, Air Force to bomb this city, and it's going to kill a bunch of people with this new technology. I mean, this is fairly new at this time, the use of these planes to bomb with the new technology, and this is going to show you, like this disjointed pain of all of these people. You can go on YouTube, and there's someone who's created this in like 3D, all of it, so you can see. But there is, like, you can see, like, there's a bull right here, and then there's this lady with a baby, and like the disjointed pain of a bombing. And so probably considered his biggest masterpiece or more famous work of art. It's one of the quintessential artworks of the Age of Anxiety for its portrayal of suffering and death. And I don't know, like, I don't know, I want this one hanging in my house. It kind of, does not put me in the best of moods, because, you can see the anguish there. But definitely representing this Age of Anxiety. So next we have non-representational art, like Wassily Kandinsky, my guy there, if you remember from your extra credit question and video. And remember, he sought to evoke emotion through non-figural painting, so trying to, kind of like the Baroque developed emotion from you. Wassily Kandinsky's paintings are supposed to do that. We'll take a look at two here. Okay, so here's one that kind of makes me happy. I don't know if it's kind of like a rainbow-esque theme, but I'm like, oh, bright, peppy, not upset, definitely not a Guernica painting, and so bright and jolly. And then I'll show you another perspective of Wassily Kandinsky's. And so this one I've heard people say makes them feel a little bit more sad, or like kind of a shift from happy to sad. But you can just see it's trying to evoke emotion through non-figural painting, and it kind of goes back to that individualism and breaking away from the herd. Like your perception of this painting would be different than my perspective. Your meaning would be different than my meaning, and so the use of expressionism and non-representational art. So next is a new form of art called Dadaism. Dada is a nonsensical word, so like this movement, they make up this word that is going to mirror a post-World War I world that no longer made sense. And so it's a new form of art where they're just like nothing makes sense, and so the art's not going to make sense, and it's going to attack all accepted standards of art. So like all of those rules of art, it's going to attack, and the behavior, and it delighted in outrageous conduct. And so like turning things you wouldn't even think of, because it's nonsensical, and we're going to see not only in art but in writing, poetry is just like so like you were to create like a Dada poem, we'd cut a bunch of clips of like magazine words out of magazines and throw them on the floor, and then it's like, I don't know, I couldn't even tell you to pick like the first 5 words because that would be giving order to it. But you just pick up as many words as you can with one hand and sit them on your desk, and that you read it out loud. That is your Dada poem, and like that would be encouraged by a Dadaist. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of these outrageous pieces of art. If you want to like hear Dada poetry, there's some on, I mean, it's kind of like Charlie Brown's Teen. It doesn't make any sense, but there's some out there on YouTube. We don't have time to do it here, nor will I put you through it. It's no Iron Maiden by any means. Okay, and so here's that attacking of all accepted standards of art. So there's Marcel Duchamp. He's a leader of the movement. He's going to give us The Fountain, which is pictured here to the lower left and also in your notes, in 1917. He's going to take a public bathroom urinal and name it The Fountain as a way of mocking traditional artistic standards. And so then voila, this becomes a piece of art. At LHOOQ 1919, he's also going to take a print of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and paint a mustache on the subject. And so you're just going to see it's going to just nothing makes sense. We're just going to take and break all of those rules of art before. Total nonsense, totally random in writing and in art. And so next is Surrealism, and a name you should be familiar with, Salvador Dali. He's the most important of the Surrealist artists, and he is going to be heavily influenced by Freud's emphasis on dreams, or actually like the symbolism in dreams. After 1924, he's going to begin painting a fantastic world of wild dreams and complex symbols where watches melted and giant metronomes beat time and impossible alien landscapes. We're going to take a look at several pieces of his art here. But just really grasping onto that irrationalness of our dreams and the irrational mind, and just like anything can happen. I don't know, like that Jennifer Lopez, like crazy movie where she's out in those people's dreams, or like that kind of reminds me of Salvador Dali. Although I think that's a bad comparison, Jennifer Lopez, Salvador Dali. Anyway, I regress. So let's take a look at some of this art. His most famous paintings we go through is going to be Persistence of Memory. We're also going to take a look at a painting called Conscience. And some others, you're going to see some tiny little Vladimir Lenin heads in one of them. I mean, you could look up all of the symbolism on this. I'll let you do that on your own. Just know that it's just symbolism. That's what it is. Emphasis on like kind of like what could be in your dreams. Okay, so here is Conscience. And so that's his conscience, like what's everything going on in your head, your conscience at the moment. I don't know. There's just so much going on in there. I guess, I don't know, some of his paintings kind of creepy, eerie. There we go. There's a little Vladimir Lenin's on the piano. I don't know, is that cape on the back of that guy supposed to be like he's the Superman or the what? And then whatever's in the doorway is freaky. And on the chair, like I said, you could probably write a thesis on the symbolism in these things. Is that bugs on the piano music? But, very like, I don't know, this would be like a nightmare for me. This would be very Kafka-esque, like I'm stuck in this room and have no way out. Those paintings, yeah, kind of weird at points. Like that guy doesn't have a face. Not really sure. Here's another one, so another piano. Pianos and watches. There's like a tree growing out of it, and then like a fountain. And, I don't know, very desolate, lonely. This would be a lonely dream, I think. Here's another one. This one kind of like, is this like war, like very odd placement of like human anatomy and definitely not on my walls like Wassily Kandinsky. That is for sure. I can't remember the name of this one, but very, very surreal, very dreamy. This is called The Visage of War. So this one, yeah, I can see, like, you know, trench warfare and the masks and all the dead, like, that I can totally get. And, oh, man, my clicker did not want you to see this painting. His most famous is and the persistence of memory, and so this is where you get, like, those melting watches, and you'll see the melting watches in a lot of others, but this is his most famous. Just, you know, kind of, what is the time? Is anything real? Do we need watches? That kind of thing. So, and the persistence of memory. So next up is music, and we have Igor Stravinsky, 1882 to 1971, and he is our most important composer of the 20th century. He is going to give us, you know, that sense that music can't make sense either, you know, kind of the anxiety, like, oh, where's the beat, like, it's nothing I'm familiar with, so the anxiety of music not making sense, just like the art, just like the literature here. And so the one you're probably the most familiar with is The Rite of Spring, and I think this is in Disney's Fantasia, which I don't have time to throw a clip in here for you, but you can find that on YouTube as well, is where he experiments with new tonalities, many of them dissonant, so not harmonious, and so it's like, you know, there's not even a harmony there, and aggressive primitive rhythms. And so you probably remember, I think that's the one with, like, the hippos dancing and stuff. Anyway, it's been a long time, but Rite of Spring, his most famous work here. So next we have Alan Schoenberg, and he is going to pioneer the 12-tone technique. So if you're a music person, you know there's like 8 tones, like fa, da, before, and so it's an atonality, and this style of music was somewhat akin to Wassily Kandinsky's non-figural paintings and the extreme abstract expressionist style, so to make you feel expression, but it doesn't go by really any rules. So non-figural and 12-tone technique. So lastly, we're going to have movies and radio. So movies are going to really start in this time period. Moving pictures are going to be at first shown as popular novelty in, like, kind of naughty peep shows and penny arcades in the 1890s, especially in Paris. But then we're going to see movies transform more into what you hopefully think of them today. And so with those movies moving more into what you're used to, Charlie Chaplin and Englishmen will become the king of the silver screen in Hollywood during the 1920s. German studios will excel in expressionist dramas like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1919. And then we're going to see the advent of the talkies, or films actually with sound, moving out of this silent era. So we'll see the advent of talkies, films with sound in 1927, as I said, will result in a revival of national film industries in the 1930s, especially France. And then motion pictures then will become the main entertainment of the masses, which I think it still is today. I mean, we have a lot more, you know, entertainment net, but I mean, it's still movies. So it becomes really the entertainment of the masses until after World War II. Motion pictures like radio, however, are going to become powerful tools of indoctrination, especially in countries with dictatorial regimes. I mean, think, you're all in this theater, all watching the same thing, experiencing the same emotions. It's going to be used in a lot of different ways to indoctrinate people. So some examples of this are things like Lenin is going to encourage the development of Soviet filmmaking, leading to epic films in the mid-1920s. The most famous of these films will be directed by Sergei Eisenstein, who dramatized the communist view of Russian history and pretty much is going to make Lenin look pretty awesome and brilliantized Russian history, almost like the opening no, won't go there. Like the opening ceremonies? No. Not brilliantly leaving out the negative parts, right? I mean, Hitler won't be left out of this. In Germany, Lena Reichenstahl will direct a masterpiece of documentary propaganda. It's called The Triumph of Will, and it's based on the Nazi Party rally at Nuremberg in 1934. And he is pretty much going to make Hitler look like Jesus, I mean, through manipulation of images on the screen. And so we're going to see that it's very much used to manipulate people. It's like this new form of propaganda, and going to be very interesting. We're going to see that radio is also going to do the same thing. And so radio, which we talked about a little bit before, Guglielmo Marconi is going to develop transatlantic wireless communication in 1901. It'll be used, as we talked about, widely for military purposes in World War I, but not until 1920 will the first major public broadcast of special events be made in Great Britain and the United States. And so we're also going to see that radio will be used to manipulate people, to also indoctrinate people as it's used more widespread. And then we're going to see that most countries are going to begin to establish direct control of radio by the government. Only in the United States will there be private ownership over the radio. We'll have the British Broadcasting Corporation, or the BBC, in Great Britain. And then radio, as I said, is going to become used effectively for political propaganda, especially under Hitler and Mussolini. And that's where we're going to end the Age of Anxiety, and pick up with Unit 9.4 later in this week.